Good evening, I'm Allan Namu. This week we go to Kitui County for a story that displays just how far HIV and AIDS has infiltrated society and tell you what group of people may become unintended victims of the virus. This is Perspective and the show starts right now. First things first though, let's take a look at a local headline that grabbed international attention last week. Here's this week's headline versus bottom line. A huge inferno gutted down the international arrivals terminal of East Africa's biggest airport, the Jomo Kenyatta International Airport. It took firefighters close to 4 hours to put out the inferno, and the subsequent damage to the terminal led to massive delays and cancellations of local and international flights in and out of JKIA for close to 3 days. Here though is the bottom line. Whereas the media has been asked not to speculate on the cause of the fire until the investigations are complete, there is something about that fire that we can question. The international standard response time of any airport firefighting unit to a fire in the airport is 3 minutes. Whereas Transport Cabinet Secretary Engineer Kamau makes the point that maneuverability was an issue for the firefighters, not only did witnesses report that firefighters arrived at the scene far later than they ought to have, but at various points in their fight to tame the blaze, they ran out of water. It cannot be gainsaid just how important an airport is to a country, and the services that keep the airport safe and working, especially the emergency services, must at all times be readily and easily deployable. That's headline versus bottom line for this week. It's often been said that those affected by HIV and AIDS are drawn from a far wider circle than those who have the virus. But as you will see in our main feature tonight, just who is affected can shock you. Tonight we show you just how biting poverty, absentee husbands and women left to fend for themselves have had the unintended consequence of encouraging the spread of HIV to a group of women that are firmly outside HIV risk groups. Here's this week's story. The branches of the baobab. It's about to happen. The Madoke Women's Group's reenactment of a home birth is as nuanced as possible. From the neighbors who hear calls for help, to the point at which Anastasia Kadango, the elderly woman in a blue trench coat, arrives. She's the midwife. Right down to Mwingi Ngate, the pregnant lady. It's down to moments now. The miracle of birth, and all of these women are here to witness it, or at least to play witnessing it. Quickly, Mwikali trades places with fellow group member Agnes Molatia, whose baby came just a few weeks ago. The midwife, Kadango's work is done. Their skit is their reality. Home births are very common here, and so are the celebrations afterward. But the shadow of HIV in childbirth is growing longer and longer here. In Kenya and in Africa, there perhaps has been no other virus that has been as invasive and as devastating as HIV and AIDS. The stories of people living with HIV and AIDS and their families, especially in the rural areas, suffering through the course of the virus, have been well documented, perhaps even over documented. But there is a small select group of people here in Mwingi that have gone under the radar of the people categorized as having been in high-risk groups. A group of people who ironically contracted the virus while bringing life into this world. The gravelly crunch of Kadango's steady footsteps are so rhythmic that just by listening to them, you know that she's on a path that she has taken before many times, the road home. Yet nearly everything about the life she knew has changed. The sturdy baobab tree at the edge of her compound welcomes her back, letting the last rays of the day's sunlight peer through its branches and illuminate Kadango's pensive silhouette as she prepares to tell us her story.
Adina koma ba choko nena sabiliswa Mwingi yumango lyondo ndile na madime na koma wodi ne mijana na kwata kaba nenuka na choke wange ke kongosi na disibitali yuna leo di Mwingi na dimbaka deka na umadeka na di Kenyatta yuna umaku wa manengi space ya kukaba bakiteta ne wendo abesibitali kwitu imeonenge balwa nugeba pa ukliniki yewe na atomiwa bakiteta.
It was difficult news to take, not least because she would have to tell her husband what she had just found out.
Udedi wa mama kwando naibo nondo ila na wayena na adwe kana wa okim ne wa adogie gebeti yena mwe nyendo gumu lugila mundu danzebe nene olugelo ndi ndwano kimu na kuona wena kudimoti kana weneja weno kimu na no go ba nene tie nena jeto hospitali atizwe the wandena aitwekala.
Despite the fact that he tested negative and she wasn't, or perhaps because of it, Kadango's husband of over 40 years left her. She would have to face her new future alone and find answers to the burning questions that put her in this position. How could she have contracted HIV at her age? Why her?
Ada.
Kadango is hard of hearing, but she didn't need to be told that her status made her a statistical anomaly. Then Kadango settled on the possibility that she may have contracted the virus when helping a young girl deliver a few years ago.
Pekana no diege kaku kaumanyama kilungu anoza nebeje nyage udona James.
Kadango's story is one that makes for worrisome possibilities here. 38-year-old Agnes Mulatia gave birth to little Mwekali a few weeks before this interview.
Ulichukua kwa hospitali ama hapa nyumbani?
Hapa nyumbani, lakini tulikuwa kwa njia tu tukienda hospitali. Lakini tukaenda mpaka tukafika.
She's one of the thousands of women here who have given birth with the assistance of traditional birth attendants or midwives like Kadango. But HIV threatens to make it even more difficult for women to deliver at home.
Kuna wale wanaitwa midwives, ingawa wengi wao siku hizi wameanza kuongopa, lakini bado kuna wale wanazalia nyumbani.
Mbona wanaogopa?
Unajua mambo imebadilika, kuna mambo ya HIV, mtu ukimuita anaepa tu, lakini kuna wale bado hawajanjua, mtu anakuja tu anatumia zile njia umeona.
Transmission of HIV from mothers delivering their children to midwives shouldn't happen. But protective gear like gloves are yet to get to the people who need them most.
Wengi hawao kina mama hawakuwa wanajua umuhimu wa kuvaa gloves kwa vile hata hapo mbeleni hazikuwa. Walikuwa wanachukua watoto tu mikono mitupu. Na by then hawakuwa wanajua kama kuna kitu inaitwa ukimwi.
Ndirono dia mathangu ma nylon. Yo na kwadio nina mabakia.
Kadango's only company at home is her last-born daughter and her grandchildren, and this little radio. Her story isn't just a cautionary tale about the rare midwife that got HIV while helping deliver a child. Kadango is the face and the heart of a combination of social and economic factors that may be aiding the spread of the virus. Up next, we delve deeper into the untold story of childbirth and HIV and AIDS, plus tell you why absentee husbands are becoming a catalyst for the spread of HIV and AIDS. That's up next on Perspective. Stay tuned. To understand why many women prefer midwives here, you have to walk a mile in a pregnant woman's shoes. With grace rare even on the catwalks of high fashion, Mwingi navigates the paths that many pregnant women must walk to either get to a clinic or, more often than not, to a midwife. She lives about 5 kilometers from a clinic and goes for her prenatal checkups there, but volunteered to take this walk with us to show us just exactly what pregnant women go through in this county. Mwingi is 7 months pregnant. And the sound of preparation for her examination welcomes her into the home of her midwife for the day, petite Priscilla Mwingi. And the session begins. Priscilla runs her practiced hands over Mwingi's belly. Soon, her belly takes an irregular shape. Her baby is moving in her womb. As she rubs Mwingi's belly, Priscilla puts her ear to it. She's listening out for a heartbeat. Priscilla had been a traditional birth attendant for over 20 years. But in late 2009, she would wake up to a reality that an increasing number of midwives here have been struck by.
Now do I do na kalo na do wa Mwingi. Na do Mwingi na ndiye kwandikwa kliniki cha madhike.
Priscilla and Kadango are two midwives who say that they contracted HIV in the course of delivering children. But their story comes at the tail end of a chain of social and economic trends in Kitui County. The sun's punishing rays have not been kind to this year's crop in Madoki. Water is scarce, fields are fallow, and the crops that do make it to harvest time are becoming as elusive as a mirage. All the more reason why this week's meeting of the Madoki Women's Group is important. Faith, their secretary, leads the group's table banking session today, taking contributions and giving loans. Today they're meeting at 38-year-old Agnes Molatia's home, and it couldn't have been at a more opportune time for Agnes.
Mimi kama mwanachama wenu Ningewaomba kama kikundi yangu muweze kumbadilisha ile siku mlikuwa mmepanga kuja kwangu. Si mnaona nilijifungua jameni, watoto wangu wanalala njaa. Sasa naomba hiyo siku irudishwe nyuma kidogo ndio muweze kunisaidia kama wanachama.
The group agrees. They will visit her to help gather firewood and clear her farm in preparation for the planting season ahead of someone else in the group. She also asks for a loan.
Haya, mpatie shilingi 200 na saini hapa. Sijui utamshika aje wewe. Saini mwanzo.
200 shillings to tide her over until she can find something else.
Kama huyo msichana wangu sasa aliingia college. Siku ile alipata barua ya college, babake akatoroka nyumbani. Sasa akaenda akakaa akasikia mtoto ameshaingia shule akarudi. Mwezi wa pili akienda kuanza akatoroka tena. Na sio huyo peke yake. Ni wengi wao wanatoroka nyumbani. Sana sana mkiwa na watoto wako shule, bwana anatoroka anajivisha. Mama anaendelea kushughulikia watoto.
Mwikali, who is about to deliver her third child, went one step further in trying to secure her children's future.
Mimi sina bwana.
Baba ya watoto wawili yuko ama?
Mimi nimefanya kuolewa na mama kama mimi. Mama ambaye hakupata watoto.
For the Akamba, women marrying women isn't as culturally taboo as one may think. It has nothing to do with a woman's sexual preference. Rather, like in Mwikali's case, it was a mechanism built into Kamba culture to ensure that a man who married a woman unable to bear children would have some way to ensure the survival of his progeny. But in Mwikali's case, the marriage also came of the fact that she couldn't trust the father of her children to provide.
Mimi mwenyewe nilikuwa nimeolewa. Baba ya hao watoto wote. Na yani wazee wengi wameacha mboma zao.
Mwikali's and Agnes's open admissions about their men make for a sad but altogether common situation here. They both need all the help they can get. This, after all, is one of the poorest counties in Kenya. The story of absentee male companions is such a common one that it has reached the ear of the government here. Mary Mwende is the area chief. She's in charge of everything from notarizing disputes between neighbors to storing government food aid to being the shoulder upon which many a woman have cried over their missing men.
Tumejaribu kuongea na wao lakini haizai matunda. Kwa vile si wengi ati hawanjali mambo ya familia kwa vile hawana pesa, wako na pesa, but they are reluctant. Na unaona wanaachia mama jukumu ya kulea familia.
Some genuinely go out in search of something to bring back home. But the majority, Mwende says, put their wives in difficult positions with their absence. And HIV lurks in the weakening links between man and wife.
Sasa yule mama akiacha pale nyumbani inakuwa ni kusunguka vibarua. Na saa nyingine unajua unaweza tafuta kibarua ukose. Na ukikosa kibarua na uone mahali pengine unaweza pata pesa. Ni rahisi sana kuenda hapo. Na ukienda kama ni kulala na mwanaume ndio upate pesa watoto wapate chakula. Inaenda kuwa huyo mwanaume maybe alikuwa infected.
As the sun sets on her home, Kadango has a parting shot for us. One that you'd hardly expect to hear from any ordinary 70-year-old African woman. But then again, her circumstances aren't ordinary. We leave her looking towards her wooded companion, the sturdy baobab tree. One that has seen HIV to an extent change the landscape here and the lives of many women, young and old. In many a desert wilderness, the baobab tree stands as a symbol of natural beauty adorning what is usually a very bare landscape. But in the story of HIV and AIDS, especially here in Mwingi, it can be taken as an analogy for something else, the way the virus spreads from city to town to countryside, with a story of poverty here intertwined in that. But the story of HIV and AIDS is many times more complex than that, as we found out, speaking to the midwives whose only vector into the world of HIV was the helping hands that they used to deliver babies for the people around them. Now they find that hard to explain to themselves or to their families why they're living with the virus. This week on Your Perspective, we're asking, is enough being done in the response towards HIV and AIDS in rural areas? Here's what some of you had to say.
2005, 2004 and 2006, there was a lot of efforts of home-based care, even awareness on AIDS or so on. But since that time, I personally was involved in one of the projects being funded by NAC. But ever since that time, I don't know whether the concept has changed or the money has dried up, or rather the account has dried up.
People in the rural area, the information they don't have information concerning maybe the protection, maybe even those who have it, the element of ARVs, and the government comes in so that to be at a point to provide the ARVs, maybe even at a lower price in our country. So I can say that it is not done enough for us to eradicate the HIV pandemic in our country.
HIV AIDS is still killing people. So enough has not been done.
HIV inaendelea kugrow na hata stigma bado haijapungua, na sana inachangiwa na kutojua na pia watu wa kwaendo, watu wengi vijana wa kwaendo, na kuna umuhimu wa serikali kuingilia kati.
Well, that's all we've had time for on Perspective this week. But remember, the conversation does not have to end with the end of this show. You can tweet us on @KTN Perspective. Tweet our show producer, Kasim Mohammed, on @KMohammed. That Mohammed is with 1M. Or tweet me on @Allan Namu. We look forward to keeping your week in perspective. As always, I'm Allan Namu. Have a good night.